Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Why don't we get going then? We'll call to order at 8:17. And first order of business, Sharon, this is you and I, to approve the attached March 11th, 2020 minutes. If you could give me a motion, I'll
make a motion to approve the minutes.
All right, I'll second it. Any discussion? I think really the only discussion is obviously we're going to be making some adjustments to our timeline that was mentioned, but that's, I think, the purpose of this call and what we need to do. But I think everything was captured correctly from last time. So Sharon, are you in agreement?
Yes.
All right, I am as well. So we can approve the minutes. Okay, so I think the purpose of this meeting, I appreciate everybody taking the time this morning for us to regroup. Originally, we were going to spend some time on kind of doing a dry run of a presentation to the impacted neighbor groups at the end of the month. Obviously, we're not going to do that, and we have not communicated anything around that at this point, but I just wanted to have a conversation on, so what should our next steps be at this point? I would hate to have us kind of have some time go by here and not do some sort of reach out. I want to get people's opinions on that, thoughts, next steps. So I'm certainly open for conversation and recommendations around this.
What do you think the time frame will be when we will be able to do a rough draft in terms of for the presentation for the people? Do you think we'll make it by June or end of May?
I want to do something sooner rather than later because,
yes.
And Richard, feel free to jump in, is the architects are moving towards a deadline to get the design done. And we want to make sure that obviously the neighbors have an opportunity to see what we're proposing, to get engaged. We don't want to give it to them, when it's too late.
I would agree. This is Richard. Yes, so Michael has available this morning some PowerPoint slides that we can share with you, some of which you've seen and some of which you have not seen. I think it would be good to share those slides with you and then talk about when we can share those slides with neighbors. And then we can also this morning talk about what we all think might be important agenda items for the neighbors. And so if we don't have that material this morning, we can certainly develop this material in the near future. But I would suggest scheduling another dry run so that we can follow up after this morning's discussion with whatever supplemental material we need to generate. But waiting until June feels awfully late, quite frankly.
Okay. Well, I think we should review the slides, and that'll be great if you have something for today.
Yeah, before I do that, has there been any discussion in town, Kat, regarding public meetings for other agenda items for other commissions in town, let's say planning and zoning? I have been invited, since I'm a member of the Hartford Zoning Board of Appeals, I've been invited to participate in a ZBA meeting in early April, which is a public meeting. And we're going to be using, I don't know what yet, but I believe other towns may have been trying to address this. What about Farmington?
We've canceled all non-essential meetings or non, really everything but our meetings and TPZ and some other ones that are, land use boards that have applications and need to move forward on them. So the intent is, I believe our next TPZ meeting was canceled because there was nothing pending for applications, but another April one is attempting to do a Zoom meeting in the future.
So in another community, we did have a meeting with town staff, meaning the town planner, the town engineer, the director of Parks and Rec. We did that using GoToMeeting, and it worked pretty well. We shared draft site plans to get those professionals, town professionals, feedback from them. But I'm thinking, which we can certainly do in Farmington if we can set that up. But we did talk about that briefly.
Yeah.
And so what we would like to do is forward some site plan information for town staff discussion, and we can invite those staff people to a go-to meeting. We will do that. But I'm thinking more about, let's say, town council update. If we're going to be doing that digitally, we should have a preview of what we're going to be doing with the committee.
Yeah. Kat, we had a board meeting the other night. We're going to have another board meeting in early April because we have business that has to get done by statute. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I would say is that as long as there is like visual backup, so a Zoom meeting without having consistent like PowerPoints going so that people can see it and listen, I think is the best way to do it. And that's how we did it. We had a really great meeting because we made sure that every agenda item had a PowerPoint so that we could go through it and people could, you know, visually follow along, but also hear it.
Yeah, I agree.
That was Kathy Grader, everybody, just so you know.
So before we discuss the next draft meeting, which is only my suggestion that we have another draft meeting of a neighborhood agenda, maybe we should now look at the material that Michael has prepared, and we can talk about what we have today, and then we can talk about what we might have to supplement to meet the neighborhood concerns.
Right. Hey, Kat, Jay made a comment on the chat.
Oh, yeah. When we were talking about the cancellation of meetings, his Human Relations Commission meeting was canceled, along with like economic development and a list of other meetings. Really just trying to, if we can hold stuff in person in the future, we want to, but to give us some time and, you know, do this thing right, we canceled most meetings. So, Michael, let me give you remote control access.
Sounds good. Actually,
I have to make you host.
I don't need yeah, I need my screen, not your screen.
Okay, so let me make you host, and then you can control.
So, I'm not seeing it yet. I just requested control. This worked before I had the option of just sharing my screen. Sorry about that.
I made you host, so you should be able to. Let me stop share of my screen. Sorry, guys. These are the things we need to work out.
Here we go.
Okay.
Here we go. Here we go. I got it. That was great. Okay. So everyone should be able to see a title slide that says preliminary neighborhood presentation. Sound good?
Yes.
Okay. So these are, as Richard said, some of these images you've seen before. Some of them you have not. Some of them are some draft ideas of some imagery that we could generate and develop in more detail, depending on what type of messaging we can agree upon for the abutters. So this is a slide about the sequence of construction, about where we're building and how we would build the building, keeping the school up and running, where we would put the temporary parking, and we could also use this slide to discuss construction traffic in and out of the site.
So this is Richard here again. So a major point or major question by neighbors might be, so are you bringing any construction equipment through my neighborhood streets? And we don't believe that that's necessary. We believe that the way we've organized this site It's possible to bring construction equipment up through the existing entrance to the site. It's just a matter of scheduling. So the equipment will arrive early. It will be scheduled by the construction manager so that there's no interference with school traffic. We don't envision requiring traffic on neighborhood streets to serve the construction site.
This shows the intermediate phase where the new building is occupied and the existing building is coming down. Anecdotally, we understand there's some concern about the noise of demolition and perhaps the air quality that's going to happen during abatement and demolition. I think this shows the remoteness of the demolition and that perhaps it can be buffered by the new building, but there's other ways to address the abatement and air quality. We'll show you that later in the subsequent slides. And then this is the final site that we can use to discuss, again, how traffic is as it exists up Monteith, and we can discuss the main entrance to the school, the evening entrance to the school, and the service. We can show you some more developed slides of that as well. I think this is just a helpful aerial view of how the site, once complete, will be organized. We've eliminated that aerial view from the competition, which showed a lot of blank roofs that made it look less like a high school. So we feel this is abstract enough that we can talk about some of the key elements and just show the upper fields, the football fields, and the new high school, which will be more important as we move to the next few slides. This is about the main school entrance. This hopefully helps people feel more comfortable about that the school is, for the most part, a low-scale structure. This is the renovated 900 wing or 2003 building, and this is the evening entrance to the school, which is on the which is interior to the site. And then this is a view we showed at the last meeting with you all about the east property line. I'm going to come back to this slide real quick. I do want to show you the next slide, which is an existing photograph of that east property line. You can see some of the abutters, and you can see the current access path as it meanders loosely along that line. You also see some extent of grading along the property line here. There's some berming that exists and some pretty good vegetation, but there's no fencing, or to the extent that there's fencing, it's a fairly loose organization. And what we would be talking about is a real fence at the property line, a 40-foot wide, 6-foot high berm, and 150-foot setback. The road, such that it exists, the walkway, the reconfigured walkway, would exist here rather than in this position where it is now. It occurs to us that we'll have to mirror image this this drawing so that it matches the perspective view. So let's return to the perspective view. Reviewing the berm, I think this is a useful view in that it shows how the top of the berm really becomes the new horizon on this side of the site, so that there isn't direct visual connection with objects on this side. And it also, I think, accurately depicts the density of planting that we would anticipate across the 40-foot width of that berm. We feel this view shows the significance of the 150-foot setback, that the school, when you look at the aerials, may feel like it's very close to the property line, but I think this shows, to the extent that it's pushed aside and its 40-foot height is the impact of that aspect ratio, 40-foot high, 150 feet back. Most importantly, I think it shows what we envision for the nature of that emergency road, which is really a better developed pedestrian sidewalk, except in times of emergency that there would be a vehicle along this road. It shows that we're not putting a lot of lighting along this emergency walk. There's no, certainly there's no tall light posts. To the extent that we would need lighting along it, we would do it with low bollards. And it shows a gathering spot for students, but that's only between the two classroom wings. And again, you know, the threshold of that gathering spot is 150 feet back from the property line. The intermediate section, which again, I think we need to construct this mirror image so that it aligns itself better with that perspective view, shows how the building itself can become a buffer for the football field, which we view as actually a more intensive use to the neighborhoods. It's noisier, it's brighter, and this building can help buffer that. We would remind the public that this edge of the building is the classroom wing, which really is a 7:30 to 2:30, on a 7:30 to 2:30 schedule, and that the larger spaces that occur in the afternoons and evenings, the gym, the auditorium, the Black Box Theater, and in fact the fields are now all pushed into the interior of the site. Here's some additional reconnaissance. We went out and looked at, you know, there isn't a street paralleling the property line, with the exception perhaps of this one, which is towards the northerly edge of the property. Really what you have is you have dead-end streets that approach the building and property line obliquely. So this is Crestwood and spacing on this road's name. But if you look at it in detail, this is the current disposition of the dead end at Briarwood. So this is the one that's more closer to Route 4. And you can see, again, you see the berming that already exists, and we would be adding another 6 feet to that. And also you see, at least in the spring, summer, and early fall, how heavily vegetated this edge is existing. This is a current footpath through to the existing baseball field. And then this is a view at the end of Crestwood, and this is where the drop gate is for emergency vehicle access. But again, you see how heavily vegetated this edge can be. It is possible to take these two views, or in fact, we could go out this week and take a wintertime view. And with the computer, we ought to be able to superimpose with accuracy what would become the new horizon of a berm the new extent of evergreen plantings here. And then what we could do is we could show the extent of essentially the roof edge of the school. And I've probably estimated where that is. But I think we can show, based on a view that the neighbors recognize, we could show a projection of what we feel the new situation would be. Crestwood would be even more favorable, because as that berm extends, the building is much further back. That north entrance of the building is much further back, and it's going to be well under what is already pretty heavily planted.
Michael, there's a question from Jay Tulin by chat asking whether there are any wetlands near the berm or any part of the property. So I don't recall wetland mapping, but at least as far as the berm is concerned, I don't believe there's any wetlands at all, but we'll need to confirm that. I think it's a good question.
There's nothing that shows up on the town's GIS website. All the wetlands are significantly downhill of this parcel. So do we have a formal survey that confirms that? No, but I think that the GIS that's available is a pretty good indication. I am aware that along the chain link fence line, that is a damp area, but frankly, I think that's just because the existing baseball field is built to shed all the water to the perimeter. And so it's not a wetlands, that's essentially a drainage swale for the ball field.
Just one second. So Jay is now following up with a question about whether any of this would need to go before Inland Wetlands Commission. And we had a initial meeting very early on with town staff. And I can't remember whether there was an Inland Wetlands Commission representative at that meeting. I know the town planner was there, town engineer was there. The question did not come up in that initial meeting, but certainly we can follow up and make sure that whether or not we are within the regulated area of the Wetlands Commission. And I can't remember what the setback is for Farmington for the regulated area. It might be 50 feet, it might be 150 feet, but we can confirm.
Yeah, those are all good questions, and the town planning department would be good gatekeepers, I think, for that as well.
Jay just responded, 150 feet. Thank you, Jay.
Okay. All right. Okay, so another area to address is the disruption of both the construction activity and in reality, I think that leads into the everyday operation of the new school. We're looking at I guess three things. The first thing is the disruption caused by the construction of the new building, the disruption and health concerns driven by the abatement and demolition of the existing building, and then lastly, what is going to be the impact of the everyday operation of the new building once the site is completely reconfigured. So Farmington does have, part of their zoning regulations, consideration for adjacent property owners' health and property values and peace of mind with essentially what's a noise and air quality ordinance. It's really geared towards much more invasive activities than what we are currently anticipating part of the school construction. It's geared towards blasting, pile driving, mass excavation, grinding of rock, that sort of thing. but nevertheless, I think it provides an outline of controls, of oversight and controls that could be brought to bear on this project by the Planning and Zoning Authority as part of protecting the public interest in pursuing this project. It's a 4-page ordinance. Among the things that it does is it provides, if something is deemed to be intensive activity, it limits the activity from 8 to 2 during weekdays only. It includes a special permitting that has to go before the zoning board, notification to the town and to the abutters of when the activity is going to occur, and then pretty significant monitoring of noise level and air quality, and then reporting back to the zoning authority of that monitoring as part of the oversight of the town to protect the public interest. So I think that's a pretty good roadmap, and it's a robust regulation. Again, it's geared to activities that we would deem to the extreme end of anything that we would anticipate doing on this site. But nevertheless, I think it's a framework that we could commit to as part of the construction and demolition endeavor on this project.
Michael, I'm thinking now, having seen this slide, that it probably would be good to create another PowerPoint slide that highlights the major components of this regulation, so that we can have a conversation with the neighbors. The neighbors may want to increase the restrictions on construction activities, which is certainly something that they could request, and then the building committee would need to advise us when we get to that point on what to include in the specification to bidders. For example, in some projects we've been asked to limit construction activities, that prevents any work in the evenings during the weekdays and prevents any work at all during the weekends. We can certainly add that to the bid specifications so that the bidders and all of the subcontractors know that there are restrictions imposed upon this specific project. But that's a discussion we can have with the neighbors and see what they would recommend for their own peace of mind.
Yeah, Richard, it's worth mentioning that if the building committee was to agree to limit the more extensive activities to this window, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., that's right during the educational window of when kids are going to be in the existing building while the new building is being constructed, or conversely, when they're in the new building while the current buildings are being demolished. So it's a bit of a balancing act. The two sites between the construction and the demolition are separated by a parking lot, so it's not like you're right next door to the high schoolers, taking down a building. But it is, in protecting the neighbor's interest, you will work against the educational interest of the high schoolers. The last slide, other than we have some resource slides at the end, is I'm going to enlarge this just so we can hopefully see it a little better here. I just want to show a clear indication of how we see the building operating in perpetuity once the site is reconfigured. First of all of the loading and unloading that occurs for the building, all the dumpsters, all the heavy mechanical equipment, the emergency generator and chillers are located over in this service yard, which is well buffered from the abutters by the new building. So I think that's an important thing to point out, that to the extent there may be activities in perpetuity on the site that may occur early in the morning, like trash retrieval, that's going to be in a discrete location on the site. All service vehicles will be routed to the interior of the site, which is less material for the abutters to the east, but is helpful, I think, to the abutters to the west, because currently all of that service and loading occurs here along the outer edge of the property. And then equally important is that the disposition of the end of Crestwood will essentially be as it is. There will be a drop gate there for emergency vehicles. Should there need to be another ingress or egress on the site, first responders or the town would come and drop that gate. Otherwise, it will just exist as a cut in the berm with a gate. So school kids can cross it on foot, but no vehicles will pass there. And then equally important, this pedestrian path that they saw in the rendering, there will be a gate here and here, so that access to that roadway will be controlled for vehicles and limited only to first responders or emergency or town use. So that this will exist as a lawn and a pedestrian sidewalk 99.9% of the time. The other items in here are just additional resource slides about the floor plans. Again, I think what the floor plans show is that the eastern edge of the property is occupied by classroom buildings, and that all of the assembly occupancies or evening occupancies are organized to the interior of the property. And let's see, that's the 900 wing, that's the aerial, and that's a more technical drawing. So that's that is a mock-up of a more focused and elaborated presentation to the abutters and adjacent neighbors.
So, Michael, I want to maybe add some things here that I thought about as you were going through the presentation, one of which is the concern for migration of dust and hazmat material during demolition. So some slide that addresses that question might be appropriate. And I'm thinking about the steps that are normally taken by demolition contractors to do screening of the air sampling in order to determine prior to demolition what the background, the nature is of the air prior to any kind of demolition. And so that they have some basis for measuring or comparison of air during and after demolition, so that you can have a record of whether or not in any material that has, what's the term, gone AWOL from the site. And that's not only to protect the neighbors, but also staff and people who use the building, you know, educators and pupils who are in the building, in the new building. When demolition is going on, we want to make sure that there is no compromise in air quality during demolition and hazmat abatement. So that's, I think, an important point to try to elaborate on. The perspective of the path adjacent to the berm is good, in my opinion. I think one question is, what does it look like at night I know that one question that has arisen in a previous public comment is emergency lighting, egress lighting. What does that look like? And what about activity in the classrooms at night? Are there night classes going on, for example? So will we have light escaping from the building that will disrupt the neighbors' nighttime enjoyment of their property? And another question that came to mind as you were going through the slides is, what about the neighbors on the northeastern side of the site, the ones that currently are near the, I believe, a ball field in that area? There's a ball field where we will be putting parking. And so a question that I would have if I were a neighbor in that location is, are you going to illuminate that parking at night? Are we going to have ambient glow that is going to keep us up at night? So right now there's a ball field. I don't know if that ball field has nighttime activity, but it would be good to get a better understanding what that parking lot is like at night.
Yeah, that's a good point, Richard. I will point out that the 142 million included a berm that starts here, comes all the way around and extends over to here. So, you know, that view at the end of Crestwood showed already some significant berming. By zoning code. We can add an additional 6 feet across that grade. So I agree that there's currently not night activities here on the ball field, but there are night activities here, and that maybe we could argue we're improving that situation.
What about everybody else in this meeting this morning? Is there any additional thoughts about what we need to supplement this presentation with?
Regarding Briarwood, that's the first opening near the tennis courts. Would that be now closed because you're going to extend the fence all the way around to Crestwood on the east side of the property?
That's a good question. I've anecdotally, I've heard a desire to at least keep pedestrian access because students in the neighborhood still walk to school, and on off hours, the neighborhood appears to use the campus as sort of a walking circuit. I mean, there's all sorts of trails through here as well. So I would be inclined to maintain a footpath there through the fence, but nothing that you could drive a vehicle through. You'd have to go up and over the berm.
Correct. I think that would be a great idea. That may be a question you may have. And the other thing is, over at Crestwood where you are putting the exit gate, would be a similar gate to what there is now, or would it be taller or wider? How would that be? Because currently it's always open.
Well, that's it would be an improved gate. It would be a brand new gate. Right. I think we would have to work with the police department. I mean, the minimum requirement is it's going to be a 14-foot wide opening in order to get emergency vehicles through.
Okay.
What it looks like, we would have to come to an agreement with the town engineer or public safety. But it's certainly not what it is now. It would be a new version of that.
Okay, that's great, because when I went out and measured it, it was between 10 and 13 feet, like the widest posts at the end, that was 13 feet. So you might want to suggest that it's really not that any wider. We're going 1 foot if it's only 14 feet wide. Okay. So I don't see any change there, really. I think that's fine.
Michael, I saw that you had the construction staging, which was great. What about a slide around phasing or timing, duration, that kind of thing? How long am I gonna, as a neighbor, gonna have to put up with this new construction type thing?
That's a good question. We should have a construction milestone calendar.
Yeah, but also. I think superimposing it, you know, saying this is 18 to 20 months, this is this portion, this whole phase ends up taking a year, but in reality, this is going to come down in a matter of months. And then you essentially just have to wait for better weather to do the green part in order to get all the landscaping to grow. But those are all, I think, good ideas to put a time constraint on. Richard, to your point about air quality, the two things that we could excerpt from there is one, just the state standard on monitoring for hazmats and the checks and balances the state imposes on educational construction. And then two, the zoning ordinance does have good oversight on decibels, vibration, and air quality monitoring for invasive construction activities. So I think there's a couple of layers of checks there that may assuage concerns to neighbors.
Well, I don't know if zoning enforcement officer actually goes out there with a decibel meter and takes measurements, and whether the zoning enforcement officer has any clout in issuing cease and desist orders. You know, that's like after the fact.
No, that's true. That's true. It is unfortunately after the fact, but by stipulation of the zoning ordinance, you not only do you have to monitor it, you have to make reports to the zoning office of what your monitors are picking up. But you're right, that may be you know, a concerned neighbor may argue that that's too little too late, but the state air quality standards on abatement is much more stringent.
Well, I think we should discuss this further with the building committee. Certainly when we get to writing specifications on the project for bidders, the committee may have some ideas about an independent entity taking measurements, doing spot checks, and maybe having in the specifications some consequences of violating those guidelines in terms of penalties to subcontractors. But that's something we should discuss with the building committee at a later stage.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Richard. Talk about an independent testing firm, perhaps, that represents the owner and during that time. I think that's what you're saying. Or a monitoring company.
There was another question also from Marcus. Traffic impacts during construction and demo periods will be a question or concern of both neighbors and residents in general. Route 4 in particular is a problem now, particularly during morning school drop-off. We might want to include something about this in the presentation as well.
Great point.
That is a good point. Just so everyone here is clear on what's in the 142 million is improvements from the curb cut here all the way up Monteith. So we will be making this again 2 full lanes out, 2 full lanes in, with fortified shoulders both ways. In the meeting that we had with the town engineer, they asked us to look into improvements on Route 4 as well. And during the competition, we identified about $400,000 of improvement that would add a dedicated right turn lane here to enter the site and a dedicated left turn lane, again, to enter the site from the north, and resignalization at Route 4. Those are likely all worthwhile things to pursue that will sit outside the school construction grant because it is off-site. Additionally, the concern with improvements south of the curb cut on Monteith, and anything on Route 4 will have to take much more detailed permitting through the state traffic authority.
So that raises a question for me. So we have promised to come back to the town council with some strategies to bring this project net cost to the town to a lower number. And yet we are saying that there may be a need for traffic improvements along Route 4, which is outside the project budget. So in the interest of full disclosure, I think we need to have this conversation with the committee and the town council about whether or not that should be budgeted as far as the referendum is concerned, so that the residents in town know that there's some money allocated to that, perhaps, unless there's other funding sources within the town that I'm not aware. Even though it's not eligible for reimbursement, I think that some residents might feel more comfortable that that's taken into account somewhere.
It could be one of those items that is an additional line item in the referendum, frankly, because its funding source would have to be different regardless.
This is Meg. Haven't I heard at some point, and I could be wrong on this, that that's actually a state road? That has an implication on our conversation, or is that not part of this?
It is Route 4 is a state road.
What does that mean to us for this? Anything?
That we would have to work with the state for a project like this. It's similar to how the traffic improvements went on the entrance to Route 4, mm-hmm. where it was state funds that did that project. So it's definitely a discussion to have.
Yeah, it's state property, not town property. So any improvements to it have to comply with state guidelines. And that means reviews by Connecticut DPW, Department of Transportation, whether or not any signalization is required, whether or not there's any taking of property required. They may require also stormwater analysis, what they call gutter analysis, for an extended length of the roadway to see what impact that may have on existing state structures, state drainage structures. So it's a review process that can be lengthy.
An OSTA study, probably.
And maybe an OSTA study, which is the Office of Transportation.
But the town bears the full funding burden on it? Is that how that works? I just don't know how that works.
I think that
there may be
negotiated.
Okay.
Yeah, there may be other funding sources available to the town. What won't happen is Costa and his office give you any money for off-site improvements.
Right. That makes sense.
And Meg, just to be more clear, so no, the building committee isn't surprised on the road, building the new high school off of a state road will require some amount of review and approval from the state traffic authority. They won't let you just do it. But the basic thought from the design team is that you're essentially replacing in-kind and existing demand. Okay. And therefore the review is going to be relatively cursory. It's possible that they may want you to prove your view angles leaving the site, that sort of thing, make sure that that's good. But the extent of work, to the extent that we have interfaced with your town engineer and the extent of work that he outlined, that level of improvement in the actual Route 4 roadbed and the signalization at Monteith and Route 4 will require a much more extensive permitting process, should the town wish to do that. all of that is, I mean, Jay's right to, that all of this can be problematic if you're surprised by it. I think if we get the correct stakeholders together on the town side and then at the state side, we can understand better how what funding sources may be available and how we would organize this once the referendum is passed successfully. I mean, once you know you're doing the high school, then you have not only the design time, but the construction time in order to get all of this up and running at the state level.
Michael, I'm thinking that it would be now a good thing to do is to have a discussion with the town engineer and maybe even a joint discussion with the state officials just to scope out, you know, what could be the impact, not only in terms of construction dollars to the town, for the town's share, but also the review and approval timeline. We need to include that in the overall project timeline, I would think. Even though we don't have the authority to proceed with the project yet, we won't know that until after the referendum, but at least we need to represent a timeline and a potential cost. I believe that we should start working on that. So I know we talked about a meeting with the town officials. Let's get that on our agenda for that discussion with the town engineer.
Okay.
All right, well, I'm just going to ask that we kind of just move on to next steps for this meeting. I know, Richard, I agree with you that we need to have another kind of dry run meeting as a follow-up, just because we have a communications meeting immediately following this one. But I guess I'm interested to know how we feel as a group is our best way to do this communication with the neighbors in our current environment and what people's thoughts are around that.
I think, this is Kat, I think we send a letter like we had intended to. Probably instead of directing people to a day, a meeting to come at the high school, we set something up, a designated web page on our website about this. We could do an online meeting like this, make all of these, this information available to them. And then if people don't have access to a computer, we could always print and send the presentations to them. I mean, I know it's better to be engaged in the actual presentation of it, but I'm just concerned about people having the capacity to join a virtual meeting like this.
And we could also put the presentation on the web page once we've had the meeting. I think.
Yeah, we are recording the meetings too, so people will be able to see it after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts around that?
Well, I think that a letter to neighbors, for starters, I think is a very good idea.
Yeah, I certainly think you're on the right track. Kat, how many neighbors are we talking about? How many butters are we talking about?
That's a good question.
I think it's approximately 6 neighbors that are directly impacted regarding the berm, but I think a lot of people from that actual neighborhood will come as well or listen. So we could have as many as 40 people or as few as 10. Judging on the past meetings that people have come, we've probably averaged about 10 people from the neighborhood, I would say.
Okay. So a meeting like this or a Zoom presentation is probably a pretty good reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
So do we stay with our current scheduling and just basically change the meeting we're going to have at the end of the month to virtual?
We could do that.
Mm-hmm. Actually be in April now.
Should we push it to give a little bit more notice?
That's fine. We can certainly do that too.
Because that the date we had was, I believe,
The 31st.
March.
the 31st, so next Tuesday.
Yeah, you want to do the following week? Does that give people enough time, you think?
The following week, the 7th, is a town council public hearing on the budget. But maybe another day that week.
Wednesday? How does that look for everyone, April 8th?
Do we have a committee meeting?
We
We have
don't,
communications.
Only.
Yeah, both Michael and I have a conflict on the 8th.
Okay.
maybe the 9th, Thursday the 9th.
That could work.
That works.
I agree.
Okay, so let's shoot for that. I'll draft a letter and set some, information up on a website with a designated page for the neighborhood.
Okay.
I think the suggestions to add slides and information in this presentation are good to move forward. And then we'll go from there.
Do you want to do, when do you want to, this meeting, to this group to meet again? Again, next week is a good checkpoint? Or do we need more time than that?
Next week would work.
Next week works for me too.
Let's do that. And then I'll
We're
do,
good.
I'll do some, a little intro slide too.
Yeah.
You know, if I can start to pull that together, just things that you guys have seen me already do, but at least to level set, and then we can go from there.
So should we say when keep up with the Wednesdays at 8:15?
Yes.
So it
Yes,
would
that's
be
fine.
Wednesday, April 1st at 8:15.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, so